The empty wing, the first thing you notice about a hospital. At night, T. The silence it S. The way the silence feels wrong. In the day, hospitals are chaos. Phones ringing, carts rattling down linoleum halls, voices calling codes, the constant hum of people fighting against sickness and time. But when the sun goes down and visit an hour's end, all of that fades. Nora had been a night shift nurse for 3 years. She was used to the hush, used to the slow rhythm of 4 drips and the shuffle of patients half asleep. She even liked it. Sometimes the quiet made the work more manageable, more personal. But there was always one part of the hospital that made her uneasy: the East Wing. No one had reason to go in there, except for the occasional maintenance crew or the security guard doing rounds. But the East Wing was connected to the rest of the hospital by a single long corridor, and every night Nora's rounds brought her near that corridor. Every night, she slowed her pace as she passed. The hallway lights were dimmer there, old bulbs flickering with a lazy pulse. The windows had been covered with plastic sheeting that rippled faintly with the draft from the vents, and beyond that first set of double doors stretched row after row of abandoned rooms, beds stripped, monitors unplugged, walls scarred with patches where equipment had been torn away. It was always too dark, too still. That night, Nora had extra reason to linger. Her last patient check had gone smoothly, vitals steady, meds administered. She didn't need to rush anywhere, and yet, when she reached the corridor leading to the East Wing, her steps slowed again. Something felt off. The doors at the far end of the corridor weren't closed. They stood cracked open, just an inch, enough to let a thin line of shadows stretch across the floor. Nora frowned. She knew she'd seen the janitor lock them earlier. She stopped, listening. The hallway behind her was quiet, but from beyond those doors came the faintest sound, a tap, then another, like knuckles against glass. She swallowed hard. "It's nothing," she told herself. "Pipes. A draft. Old buildings make noises," but the sound came again, louder this time, as though whatever made it wanted her attention. She forced herself to turn away, shoes squeaking softly against the tile. She told herself she wouldn't look back, but she did. And when she did, she saw it, a shadow. Not the trick of a light. Not her own reflection. A figure, tall and dark, standing just beyond the cracked doors, watching. Her breath caught. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch when her eyes locked on it. It just stood there. Nora blinked, and in that blink, it was gone. The doors were closed again, tight against the frame. Her heart thudded in her ears. She stood frozen in the corridor for what felt like an eternity before forcing her feet forward back into the safety of the main ward. By the time she reached the nurse's station, her hands were trembling. "Everything all right?" asked Karen, the charge nurse, glancing up from her chart. Nora hesitated. The words "I saw someone in the East Wing" hovered on her tongue, but she swallowed them back. What could she say? That she'd seen a shadow in a place that should be empty. That doors had moved when no one touched them. She forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." Kara nodded knowingly. "This shift'll do that to you." But Nora couldn't shake the feeling. She knew what she'd seen, and deep down, she knew the night was just beginning. Whispers in the East Wing, Nora told herself she wouldn't go back. Whatever she thought she saw at the end of that corridor, whatever sound she thought she heard, it was nothing. Stress, fatigue, a trick of dim lights, and an overactive imagination. But the human mind is stubborn, and curiosity is cruel. By the time her rounds brought her back near the East Wing, her eyes were already drifting toward those doors. They were closed tonight. Locked, just like they should be. But as she approached, her steps slowed again, her stomach tightening. The silence was worse than the noise. She forced herself to keep walking, to move past it, but something deep in her chest stopped her. She was tired of feeling afraid, tired of rushing past that dark corridor every single night. Her badge jingled faintly against her scrubs as she turned toward the doors. The metal push bar was cold under her palm. She pushed. The hinges groaned as the door swung open into the empty East Wing. The smell hit her first. Stale, dusty, with an undertone of something chemical, something sharp. The air was colder, too, as if the vents here were overworking. Her footsteps echoed down the long hall. Plastic sheeting flapped faintly over the covered windows, shadows rippling across the walls. The abandoned rooms yawned open on either side, their beds bare, their machines unplugged. It was like walking into a skeleton of the hospital. Nora's heart thudded louder the farther she went. She kept her flashlight low, sweeping it along the floor tiles. She told herself she was just checking, making sure the place really was empty. At the end of the hall, she stopped outside room 314. Something about the doorway pulled at her, made her skin crawl. Her flashlight beam quivered as she lifted it, angling it into the room. The bed was stripped bare, mattress leaning against the wall. An unplugged monitor sat dusty in the corner. Nothing out of place. Tap. Her blood turned to ice. The sound came from inside the room. She swung the light back, every muscle in her body stiff. The monitor screen was black, but against the glass surface, a mark had appeared. A handprint, small, child-sized. Nora stumbled back into the hall, breath caught in her throat. She spun toward the main corridor, ready to run, when she heard it. A whisper, so faint she almost thought it was the wind moving the plastic sheets. But no, this was different. Shaped. Words. Nora. Her knees weakened. She froze, every nerve screaming to flee, but her body locked tight. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Nora, come back." Her flashlight flickered. The plastic covering the windows bulged inward, as though something on the other side was pressing against it. She could see indentations form in finger, 5 long fingers dragging slowly down the sheet. That broke her paralysis. Nora bolted down the corridor, shoes slapping the tile. The double doors loomed ahead, and she shoved through them, stumbling back into the lit, living part of the hospital. She didn't stop running until she reached the nurse's station. Karen looked up again, frowning. "What's going on?" "You look like you saw." Nora's mouth opened, but no words came. She glanced back down the hall. The doors to the east wing were closed again, still and quiet. She wanted to tell Karen everything, but what could she say? That the abandoned wing knew her name, that it was calling her inside. Her hands shook as she poured herself a cup of stale coffee, the bitter taste doing nothing to chase the chill in her bones. She sat at the station, pretending to read a chart. But every sound, every creak of the building, every rattle of the vents set her nerves on edge, because now she knew the East Wing wasn't empty, and whatever was in there wanted her. Trapped in the East Wing, the rest of Nora's shift crawled by. Every tick of the clock dragged like a weight across her chest. She tried to keep busy, checking charts, adjusting IVs, doing anything to keep her mind from drifting back to that corridor. But no matter how she tried to distract herself, she couldn't escape the memory of the whisper. Her name, spoken from the dark. By 3 in the morning, the ward was quiet again. Patients slept, monitors hummed, and Karen had retreated to the break room for coffee. Nora stood at the nurse's station, flipping absently through a chart she'd already read twice when the overhead lights flickered. Not a quick blink, a long, shuddering pulse, like the whole building was struggling to breathe. The computers rebooted with a chorus of beeps. The hallway lamps dimmed, buzzed, then steadied, and in the hush that followed, the phone at the station rang. Nora jumped. She snatched the receiver, pressing it to her ear. But there was no voice, only static. "Hello?" she whispered, though she wasn't sure why she kept her voice low. "This is the nurse's station." The static wavered, shifted, and beneath it, she heard it again. Her name. Nora. Her hand went cold. She slammed the receiver down, heart pounding. The phone immediately rang again. Nora backed away from the desk, shaking her head. She wasn't going to answer it. Not again. The ringing cut off, and in its place came a sound from the East Wing. A door slamming. Nora's eyes shot to the corridor. The double doors that separated the East Wing from the main hospital had swung open, not cracked, not ajar. Wide open, yawning like and beyond them, the hall was lit. A pale, sickly light glowed from the ceiling fixtures that hadn't worked in months. Her stomach dropped. She should have woken Karen. Should have called security, but something stronger than fear pulled at her. Some dark gravity that dragged her feet toward the corridor. Her shoes squeaked against the tile. The air grew colder with each step, a chill that seeped through her scrubs and into her skin. When she crossed the threshold into the East Wing, the doors swung shut behind her with a heavy thud. Nora spun, grabbed the bar, shoved. Nothing. The doors wouldn't budge. Her breath came fast, shallow. Panic clawed at her throat. She pounded on the metal, shouting for Karen, for anyone. The sound echoed uselessly down the deserted hall. Then the whisper came again. Closer, louder. Nora. The light above her flickered, shadows lengthened along the walls, stretching unnaturally, bending in ways they shouldn't, and then soft, deliberate. Soft. Nora pressed herself against the wall, her flashlight trembling in her hand. She forced the beam down the corridor. A figure stood at the far end. Tall, thin, its face lost in shadow. It didn't move when the light hit it. Didn't flinch. Didn't blink. It only raised one hand and beckoned. Nora's throat tightened. She couldn't move, couldn't think. The air around her felt heavy, pressing in on her chest. The figure took one step forward. The lights overhead died. Darkness swallowed the hall. Nora screamed. She ran blindly, the beam of her flashlight jerking wildly across doorways and peeling paint. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to move. But the east wing wasn't empty. Doors slammed behind her as she passed, one after another, as though invisible hands were closing them. The air grew thick with whispers, dozens of voices tangled together, all hissing her name. Nora, Nora, Nora. She stumbled into room 314. The same room with the handprint. Her flashlight caught the bed frame, the bare mattress, the black screen of the unplugged monitor. Another handprint smeared across the glass, larger this time. Fresh. Her light flickered. She swung it toward the corner and saw someone standing there, small, child-sized, hair hanging loose over a pale face. The child raised a hand, pressing it to the wall. The plaster rippled beneath its palm like water. Nora stumbled back, the flashlight slipping from her grip and clattering across the tile. Darkness swallowed her, and in that darkness, the whispers grew louder, closer, until they were all around her. The patient who never left. The whispers wrapped around Nora like a shroud. She pressed her palms to her ears, but the voices bled through her skin, through her skull. They weren't just saying her name anymore. They were chanting something else. Low, urgent. Words she couldn't quite understand, but the rhythm felt wrong. Almost ritualistic. Her flashlight sputtered back to life, rolling on the floor, its beam trembling across the room. The child was gone. The corner stood empty, though the walls still bore the ripple of disturbed plaster, soft and uneven as though it hadn't fully solidified. Then came the footsteps, not soft this time. Heavy, slow, echoing through the hall outside room 314. Nora crouched, grabbing her flashlight with trembling fingers. The beam shook as she turned it toward the doorway. The figure was there again. Closer now. Tall, thin, dressed in something that might once have been hospital scrubs but hung loose and tattered. Its face was still hidden, but its head tilted unnaturally far, neck bending with a grotesque creak. It stepped into the room. Nora's back hit the far wall. The plaster was cold, clammy against her scrubs. "Stay away," she whispered, though her voice cracked with fear. The figure stopped, then it raised one hand. the same gesture as before, beckoning. The light flickered, and in that flicker, the figure wasn't alone anymore. Behind it, the room filled with others, patients, some standing, some sitting, all pale, hollow-eyed, faces slack with something worse than death. They watched her in silence, their heads tilting in unison. Nora's legs gave way. She slid to the floor, breath coming in sharp gasps. The tallest figure moved closer, until the sour chill of its presence pressed against her skin. Slowly, it leaned down, its shadow falling over her, and for the first time, she saw its face. Not a stranger, a man she'd cared for. Months ago, a patient in the East Wing before renovations had closed it. She remembered him vividly, the way his eyes had followed her even when he was too weak to move, the rasp of his voice when he asked her not to leave him alone at night. He hadn't made it. She'd been on shift the night he died. Now, his face was inches from hers, lips cracked, skin waxy, eyes filled with something black, bottomless. "You left us," he whispered. His voice was jagged, like broken glass dragged across metal. The others behind him echoed, their voices layering, overlapping. "You left us. You left us. You left us." Nora shook her head violently, tears spilling hot down her cheeks. "No, I." The man pressed a finger to her lips. The touch was icy, burning her skin. "You're one of us now." The room plunged into darkness. When the lights came back, Nora was on the floor of the East Wing corridor, alone. The doors to room 314 stood open. Inside, the bed frame was upright again, the mattress neatly in place, as though it had never been abandoned. Her watch told her it was almost 6 a.m. The first signs of dawn bled pale blue through the covered windows. Shaking, she stumbled back through the double doors. This time, they opened easily. She nearly collapsed against them as she pushed into the main hospital. Karen was waiting at the nurse's station, a coffee cup in hand. She frowned when she saw Nora's face. "You all right? You look like death warmed over." Nora wanted to tell her everything, wanted to scream that the East Wing wasn't empty, that the patients hadn't left, that something was waiting there. But when she opened her mouth, nothing came out, only a hollow rasp, like the voices she'd heard in the dark. Karen's frown deepened. "Go home and get some sleep. You're running yourself ragged." Nora nodded numbly, collected her bag, and walked out into the breaking dawn. But as she stepped into the parking lot, she froze. In the reflection of her car window, she saw herself pale, hollow-eyed, her head tilting at an unnatural angle. And behind her, just over her shoulder, the man from room 314 smiled. Closing narration: hospitals are supposed to be places of healing, of hope. But at night, in the silence between heartbeats and the spaces between breaths, they become something else. Some patients never leave. Some voices never fade. And sometimes, when you walk the empty wings, you might discover you're not tending to the living anymore, but joining the dead.